The small bronze bell on Wilhelmina Mina Thornbridge's Victorian porch chimed softly in the autumn breeze, its familiar tone marking another Tuesday morning in Silver Creek. At 73, Mina had perfected the art of living alone, her days flowing in predictable patterns that offered comfort after Harold's passing 5 years ago. She smoothed her silver hair, secured in its usual neat bun, and adjusted the collar of her powder blue cardigan before stepping out to her waiting Buick. Just the farmer's market and back, she reminded herself, patting the leather-bound shopping list in her purse. Nothing more, nothing less. The car, a well-maintained 1998 Buick Century in a subdued shade of navy blue, had been Harold's pride. Now it served as Mina's faithful companion on her limited excursions around town. She ran her fingers along the steering wheel, feeling the slight indentations where Harold's hands had gripped it countless times. These small connections to him remained precious, though the sharp pain of loss had mellowed to a gentle ache that rose and fell like the tide. Market day in Silver Creek brought the sleepy town to life, with colorful stalls lining the historic town square. Mina nodded politely to familiar faces as she made her careful selections. Firm tomatoes from the Peterson farm, honey from the Campbell apiary, and freshly baked sourdough from Mary's bakery. She paused at each transaction, exchanging brief pleasantries without inviting deeper conversation. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Mrs. Thornbridge?" called Ellie from the flower stand. "Indeed," Mina replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Those dahlias look lovely." "They'd brighten up your window boxes something wonderful," Ellie suggested, but Mina shook her head. "Perhaps another time." Back at her car, Mina arranged her purchases in the trunk, each bag in its proper place. The morning had taken on an unusual quality. Her teacup had developed a hairline crack at breakfast, spilling Earl Grey across her crossword puzzle, and the heirloom roses she tended daily had mysteriously bloomed out of season. Mina wasn't superstitious, but these small disruptions to her carefully ordered world left her feeling unsettled. As she drove home along Maple Road, the sky darkened with unexpected swiftness. Charcoal clouds gathered overhead, and the first fat raindrops splattered against her windshield. Not wanting to drive in a downpour, Mina pulled beneath the shelter of ancient maple trees lining the quiet lane that bordered Silver Creek Cemetery. She left her window partially open, breathing in the distinctive earthy scent of rain-soaked soil that had always brought her comfort. The sudden movement caught her completely off guard, a blur of matted fur and desperate energy, as a dog leapt through the half-open window and landed on her passenger seat. Mina gasped, instinctively clutching the pearl necklace at her throat, Harold's last gift before the cancer took him. "Goodness gracious!" she exclaimed, pressing herself against the driver's door. The animal, a border collie with unusual blue-grey eyes, looked as startled as she felt. It trembled visibly, making no move toward her, but instead curling into itself on the beige upholstery. Rain now hammered against the car roof, creating a percussion that matched Mina's racing heart. "Now what am I to do with you?" she murmured, studying the creature. The dog was painfully thin, its black and white coat matted with mud and burrs, but something about those intelligent eyes held Mina's gaze. They weren't threatening, they were pleading. Mina reached for her phone to call animal control, then hesitated. As she looked more closely, she noticed something glinting among the tangled fur around the dog's neck. Not a collar, but something that caught the dim light filtering through the rain clouds. "What's this you have here?" she asked softly, extending her hand with slow caution. The dog didn't flinch, as her fingers found a small tarnished silver locket nestled against its neck. It was attached to a frayed piece of ribbon that had nearly disintegrated. With gentle movements, Mina worked the locket free, surprised to find it warm despite the cool day. The clasp was stiff with age, but it yielded to her persistent touch. When it finally fell open in her palm, Mina saw something that made her breath catch. A faded photograph of a familiar face, Theodore "Theo" Gallagher, the reclusive former postal worker whose property bordered her own garden. They had exchanged nothing more than distant nods for 15 years, separated by stone walls and unspoken histories. "You belong to Mr. Gallagher," Mina whispered, looking into the dog's eyes with new understanding. She turned the locket over and found a single word etched into the silver. "Scout. Is that your name?" Scout. The dog's ears perked slightly at the sound, and its tail gave a tentative thump against the seat. Mina had always prided herself on making sensible decisions. The reasonable thing would be to call animal control or perhaps the police department. Yet something held her back. Perhaps the unusual circumstances of their meeting, or the unexpected connection to her neighbor, or simply those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand more than an animal should. The rain showed no signs of letting up. Mina glanced at her watch. Nearly noon, and her carefully planned day was unraveling by the minute. She looked at the dog again, then at the locket in her palm. "Well, Scout," she said with a decisiveness that surprised her, "I suppose we should return you to your owner." She started the engine, the familiar purr usually bringing her comfort. But today, with her unexpected passenger watching her every move, Mina felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the unpredictable flutter of life taking an unexpected turn. As she drove toward Theo Gallagher's cottage at the edge of town, Mina couldn't help wondering what had brought this creature to her car of all places. The dog, Scout, seemed to relax slightly as they traveled, though his trembling hadn't fully subsided. "You're quite thin," she observed, noting the visible ribs beneath the matted fur. "Has Mr. Gallagher not been feeding you properly?" The question hung in the air. In truth, Mina knew almost nothing about Theodore Gallagher beyond his reputation as the town recluse. They had been neighbors for 15 years, sharing a property, line marked by an old stone wall and unspoken agreement to respect each other's privacy. She had occasionally glimpsed him tending his vegetable garden or splitting wood for his fireplace, but they had never exchanged more than polite nods. Rain continued to drum against the roof as Mina turned onto the narrow lane leading to Gallagher's cottage. The old Buick bounced over potholes, sending ripples through puddles that had already formed in the uneven dirt road. For the first time in years, Mina found herself venturing into unfamiliar territory, both literally and figuratively, all because of a hungry dog with something unexpected around its neck. Theodore Gallagher's cottage came into view as Mina rounded the final bend in the lane. Unlike her meticulously maintained Victorian, his home showed clear signs of neglect: peeling paint, loose shutters, and an overgrown garden that had once been orderly. The sight unsettled her further. Theo had always kept his property tidy, if modest. This disarray spoke of recent troubles. "Wait here," she instructed Scout, who had settled into a tight ball on the passenger seat. Stepping into the rain with her umbrella, Mina approached the cottage with cautious steps. The flagstone path was slick with rain and partially obscured by encroaching weeds. She knocked firmly on the weathered door, listening for movement inside. Nothing but the steady drum of rain answered her. After 3 increasingly forceful attempts, Mina peered through the front window. The interior was dim, but she could make out a simple living room with a stone fireplace, the embers long cold. A half-empty mug sat on a side table beside an open book, as if the reader had stepped away momentarily. But something in the stillness told her the cottage had been empty for more than just hours. A voice from behind startled her. "He's not there, Mom." Mina turned to find a middle-aged man in a rain-soaked work jacket standing at the edge of the property. He held a shovel and wore mud-caked boots, clearly interrupted from field work by the sudden downpour. "I'm looking for Mr. Gallagher," Mina explained, unconsciously straightening her posture. "I found his dog." The man's expression shifted to surprise. "You found Scout? Well, that's something. The whole town's been keeping an eye out, though many figured a coyote got him by now." "Is Mr. Gallagher away?" Mina asked, the knot of concern in her stomach tightening. "You could say that. He's been in the hospital these past 3 weeks. Bad fall from his roof, was trying to fix a leak all by himself, stubborn as he is." The man shook his head. "Name's Frank Dawson, by the way. I farm the land adjacent to Theo's property." "Wilhelmina Thornbridge," she replied automatically. 3 weeks? I had no idea." Frank looked at her curiously. "You're the Rose lady from over on Elm Street, aren't you? Theo's mentioned you now and again." The statement caught Mina off guard. In 15 years as neighbors, I never imagined Theo Gallagher noticed her roses, much less spoke of them to others. Will he recover? The question felt strangely personal for someone who was practically a stranger. Doctors say he'll mend, but it's slow going at his age. Broke his hip and 2 ribs. He's been beside himself about Scout, though. Dog ran off the day of the accident. Must have been spooked by the ambulance. Frank gestured toward her car. "That really him in there?" Mina nodded. "He jumped through my window." "During the rainstorm. He's terribly thin. Poor creature's probably been fending for himself all this time. Theo will be overjoyed to know he's safe. He's got no family except that dog, you know. No family. The words resonated with Mina in a way she hadn't expected. She too had no family left. No children, no siblings, just the memory of Harold and a house full of carefully preserved moments. Which hospital? She heard herself asking. County General. But visiting hours might be over soon. With it being afternoon, Mina thanked Frank and returned to her car, mind working through this unexpected puzzle. Scout lifted his head as she settled into the driver's seat, those remarkable eyes following her movements. Your owner is in the hospital, she told him, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. He's been worried about you. The reasonable action would be to call the hospital, inform them about the dog, and arrange for animal control to take over. That's what the Wilhelmina Thornbridge of yesterday would have done. Efficient, sensible, uninvolved. Instead, she found herself making a decision that would ripple through the fabric of her carefully ordered life. We're going to visit him, Scout, right now. The drive to County General Hospital took 20 minutes, each passing mile increasing Mina's apprehension. She hadn't set foot in a hospital since Harold's final days. The very thought of those antiseptic corridors and the particular hush that fell over rooms where life and death negotiated their terms made her hands tremble on the steering wheel. Yet something pushed her forward, perhaps Scout's trusting presence beside her, or the weight of the silver locket now tucked in her cardigan pocket. She parked in the visitors section, then turned to the dog. I can't take you inside, she explained, feeling slightly foolish for speaking to an animal as if he understood. But I'll tell him you're safe. I promise. Scout watched her intently, then rested his chin on his paws with what seemed like resigned understanding. Mina cracked the windows enough for air but not enough for escape, then made her way toward the hospital entrance, each step heavier than the last. The antiseptic smell hit her the moment the automatic doors slid open, bringing an unwelcome flood of memories. Harold's sunken cheeks, the steady beep of monitors, the hushed consultations with doctors, whose expressions told her everything their careful words tried to soften. May I help you? The receptionist's voice pulled Mina back to the present. I'm here to see Theodore Gallagher, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Room 214, second floor, east wing. The elevator ride gave Mina precious moments to compose herself, fingers absently touching the locket in her pocket. What would she say to a man she barely knew? How would she explain her presence? The doors opened before she had answers. Room 214 had the door partially ajar. Mina knocked softly, then peered in. Theodore Gallagher looked smaller than she remembered. His tall frame diminished against the white hospital bedding. His beard, usually neatly trimmed, had grown wild, and new lines etched his weathered face. He was staring out the window at the rain, expression distant. Mr. Gallagher? Mina's voice sounded strange to her own ears. He turned, confusion crossing his features as he tried to place her. Mrs. Thornbridge? From Elm Street? Yes, she confirmed, stepping just inside the doorway. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all. He gestured weakly to the chair beside his bed. Just surprised to see you. We've never exactly been social, have we? The faint humor in his voice eased some of Mina's tension. She took the offered seat, noticing the stack of unopened get-well cards on his bedside table and the untouched food tray pushed aside. I found Scout, she said simply, watching his face transform with those 3 words. Theo's weathered face transformed at the mention of Scout's name. His eyes, dulled by pain and medication, suddenly brightened with a spark that took years off his appearance. Scout, you found him? His voice cracked with emotion as he attempted to sit upright, wincing at the movement. Where is he? Is he all right? He's in my car, Mina explained, unconsciously touching the silver locket in her pocket. He jumped through my window during the rainstorm. He's quite thin, but seems otherwise unharmed. Tears welled in Theo's eyes, a vulnerability that made Mina look away momentarily to afford him privacy. When she glanced back, he was clutching the hospital blanket with trembling hands. 3 weeks I've been worried sick about him, Theo said, his voice steadier now. The nurses probably think I'm senile, asking about my dog more than my own health, but Scout's all I've got. The raw honesty in his statement resonated with Mina. She understood all too well what it meant to have your world reduced to a single point of connection. I spoke with your neighbor, Mr. Dawson. He told me about your accident. Theo grimaced. Foolish mistake. At my age, I should have known better than to climb on a roof, but that leak wasn't fixing itself. He studied her face with newfound curiosity. Why did you bring him here yourself? Most people would have called animal control. The question caught Mina off guard. Why had she driven to his cottage, then to the hospital, instead of making a simple phone call? The Wilhelmina Thornbridge, who had awakened this morning, would never have deviated so far from her careful routine. I'm not entirely sure, she admitted, surprising herself with her candor. Something about the way he looked at me, perhaps. And then there was this. She withdrew the silver locket from her pocket and placed it in Theo's outstretched hand. His fingers closed around it reverently. I thought this was lost forever, he whispered, thumb tracing the worn surface. My wife's locket. I put Scout's name on the back after she passed, and kept his photo inside. Been using that ribbon as his collar since his real one broke last month. A moment of understanding passed between them, the quiet recognition of objects that held more meaning than their material worth could suggest. Mina thought of Harold's cardigan that still hung in her closet, unworn but impossible to discard. The hospital is releasing me tomorrow, Theo continued, reluctance evident in his tone. But I'm not supposed to do much for myself for a few weeks. Doctor's orders. I've been worried about how I'll manage Scout. He hesitated, then asked, Did you happen to notice if my neighbor has been putting food out? I asked him to before they took me away in the ambulance, but Scout ran off so quickly. Mina thought of the neglected appearance of Theo's cottage. I'm not sure anyone's been tending to your property, Mr. Gallagher. His face fell. Frank's been busy with harvest, I expect. Can't blame him. After a moment, he added softly, I don't know what I'm going to do about Scout. Can't walk him with this hip. Can barely take care of myself for the time being. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the window, creating a backdrop to the uncomfortable silence that followed. Mina's thoughts raced ahead of her. The sensible thing would be to wish him well, perhaps contact a local pet service on his behalf, and return to her ordered life on Elm Street. Instead, she found herself saying, I could help. The words hung between them, surprising them both. Mina continued before she could reconsider. Just until you're back on your feet. I could check on Scout daily, perhaps bring groceries. Each offer expanded her commitment further, yet the usual anxiety that accompanied disruptions to her routine was curiously absent. Theo studied her with cautious hope. Why would you do that, Mrs. Thornbridge? We've been neighbors for 15 years and barely exchanged 2 words. It was a fair question. Mina smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from her skirt, buying time to understand her own motivations. Perhaps it's time that changed, she finally said. And please call me Mina. Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse arriving to check Theo's vitals. Mina took the opportunity to step into the hallway, her mind whirling with the implications of what she'd just offered. She hadn't extended herself to anyone since Harold's passing, not to neighbors, not to the church ladies who had eventually stopped inviting her to socials, not even to her late husband's friends who had tried to include her in their outings. Yet here she was, volunteering to help a virtual stranger and his dog. As she waited in the sterile hospital corridor, Mina realized that the knot of anxiety that had lived in her chest for 5 years had loosened slightly. In its place was something unfamiliar, a flutter of purpose. When the nurse emerged, she indicated Mina could return. Theo looked more tired than before, but his expression had softened. If you're serious about helping, he said without preamble, there's a spare key under the blue flower pot by the back door. The pantry's likely bare, but there should be dog food in the cabinet beside the refrigerator. Scout likes to sleep in the sunroom. His leash hangs by the door. The detailed instructions revealed how much thought he'd already given to Scout's care. Mina nodded, committing each point to memory. I'll make sure he's comfortable until you return home. I appreciate this more than I can say, Mina, Theo replied, her name sounding foreign yet pleasant in his deep voice. Not many would go out of their way like this. As she prepared to leave, Theo held out the silver locket. Would you mind keeping this safe? I'd rather not lose it here, and Scout seems to have found his way to the right person already. The weight of the locket felt significant as it returned to Mina's pocket. She promised to visit again the following day to coordinate Theo's discharge, then made her way back to the parking lot where Scout waited patiently. Well, she told the dog as she settled behind the wheel, it seems we'll be seeing more of each other. Scout's tail thumped against the upholstery, his blue-gray eyes watching her with what seemed like approval. As they drove toward Theo's cottage to gather supplies before heading to her home, Mina realized this was the first Tuesday in 5 years that had deviated from her careful routine. Strangely, she felt no desire to return to the predictable patterns that had defined her widowhood. The rain had softened to a gentle mist by the time they arrived at the cottage. Under the fading afternoon light, the neglect was even more apparent. Gutters overflowing, garden overtaken by weeds, paint peeling from the wooden trim. Yet there was an undeniable charm to the place, with its stone pathway and the carefully constructed bird feeders that dotted the yard. "Let's get you some food," Mina told Scout as she located the key exactly where Theo had described. The cottage interior smelled of wood smoke and herbs, cluttered but clean. Bookcases lined the walls, filled with well-worn volumes on carpentry, gardening, and local history. Photographs in simple frames captured moments from a life Mina knew nothing about. A younger Theo beside a smiling woman in a garden, the same woman with Scout as a puppy, landscapes that didn't look like Silver Creek. As Scout devoured the food she prepared, Mina found herself wondering about the woman in the photographs. Theo had mentioned a wife who had passed, but offered no details. The cottage held other mysteries too. Half-completed woodworking projects in various stages, journals stacked beside a reading chair, sketch pads filled with detailed drawings of birds. In the growing dusk, Mina gathered Scout's essentials, his bed, favorite toys, food, and loaded them into her Buick. The decision to bring him to her home rather than leave him at the cottage came naturally. Something told her both Scout and Theo would rest easier, knowing the dog wasn't alone in the empty house. As they drove toward Elm Street, Mina glanced at her unexpected companion. "What an unusual turn of events," she murmured. Scout merely watched the familiar landscape pass by, his presence somehow making the Buick feel less like a shrine to Harold and more like a vehicle simply heading home. Silver Creek awakened to clear skies the morning after the storm. Mina rose at her usual early hour despite a night disrupted by Scout's adjustment to unfamiliar surroundings. She found him curled on the braided rug beside her bed rather than in the comfortable dog bed she'd placed in the kitchen. "Making yourself at home, I see," she commented, receiving a thumping tail in response. The morning routine she had perfected over years of solitude now accommodated Scout's needs. A brief walk around her meticulously maintained garden, breakfast preparations that included a bowl for her, four-legged guest, and careful measuring of coffee grounds for a single cup. The dog watched her methodical movements with those intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "I don't know what you're accustomed to at Mr. Gallagher's," she told him, "but we maintain certain standards here." Yet even as she spoke, Mina realized how quickly she had adjusted her precise schedule to include this creature. The silver locket rested on her dresser, catching morning light and serving as a tangible reminder of her unexpected commitment. By mid-morning, Mina had compiled a shopping list based on what she'd observed at Theo's cottage. Necessities for his return home, easy-to-prepare foods, household supplies, and medications the discharge nurse had mentioned during yesterday's visit. She hesitated before adding fresh flowers to the list, then decided the bright blooms might bring cheer to a home that had clearly missed its caretaker. "You'll need to stay here while I fetch Mr. Gallagher," she informed Scout as she prepared to leave. The dog tilted his head, seeming to process her words. "Yes, I'm bringing him home today. You can reunite there." The drive to County General felt different in daylight, less weighted by memories of Harold's final days. Mina arrived to find Theo already dressed in his own clothes, sitting tensely on the edge of the hospital bed. A nurse reviewed discharge instructions while a younger aide waited with a wheelchair. "Mina," Theo's face brightened when he spotted her. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I said I would," she replied simply, accepting the packet of papers the nurse handed her. Instructions for medication schedules, physical therapy exercises, and follow-up appointments now became her responsibility, a role she hadn't anticipated, but found herself embracing with characteristic efficiency. The journey home proceeded in awkward but not unpleasant silence. Theo seemed embarrassed by his dependence, gripping his walking cane with white knuckles and staring straight ahead. Only when they turned onto the dirt road leading to his cottage did he speak. "I expect the place looks a fright," he said, voice gruff with concern. "Hadn't gotten around to the fall maintenance before my foolishness." "Nothing that can't be addressed in time," Mina answered diplomatically, though her mental list of necessary repairs had grown with each visit. Scout has been staying with me. I thought it best not to leave him alone overnight. This information visibly relaxed Theo. That was thoughtful. He doesn't do well alone since Charlotte passed. The casual mention of a name opened a door to questions Mina wouldn't have dared ask directly. Charlotte was your wife? Theo nodded, his gaze fixed on the approaching cottage. 15 years gone now. Cancer took her quickly, at least there's that mercy. He glanced sideways at Mina. Heard you lost your husband some years back. Harold, wasn't it? 5 years, Mina confirmed, surprised he knew. Heart failure. They shared a moment of mutual understanding as the Buick crunched to a stop on the gravel driveway. Before Mina could exit to assist him, Theo spoke again. Strange how life goes on afterward, isn't it? Not that you want it to at first, but then one morning you wake up and realize you're still here, still breathing, still putting one foot before the other. His words articulated something Mina had felt but never expressed. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and busied herself, gathering the discharge papers. Getting Theo settled proved more challenging than anticipated. The cottage, charming as it was, hadn't been designed with mobility issues in mind. 3 steps led to the front porch, each one requiring careful navigation with the walker the hospital had provided. Inside, throw rugs created potential hazards, and the bathroom lacked grab bars for safety. This won't do, Mina muttered, mentally rearranging the living space to accommodate Theo's temporary limitations. We'll need to make some adjustments. You've already done more than enough, Theo protested as she helped him into his recliner. I can manage from here. Mina fixed him with the practical gaze that had intimidated generations of schoolchildren during her teaching years. Mr. Gallagher. Theo, please. Theo, she amended. You have a broken hip, 2 fractured ribs, and a dog who needs walking. Managing isn't an option at present. He looked prepared to argue, but instead sank back into the recliner with a wince that betrayed his discomfort. You're as formidable as Charlotte used to say. The comment caught Mina off guard. Your wife spoke of me. Theo's expression softened with reminiscence. She admired your roses. Said anyone who could coax such beauty from ordinary soil must have a good heart, no matter how private they kept it. The observation, coming from a woman Mina had never properly met, felt startlingly accurate. She had indeed guarded her heart carefully, even before Harold's passing had reinforced her inclination toward solitude. I should collect Scout, she said, suddenly needing distance from this unexpected insight. He'll be wondering where you are. The reunion between man and dog provided a welcome emotional reprieve. When Mina returned with Scout, the border collie's entire body quivered with excitement at the sight of his owner. He approached with remarkable gentleness, somehow understanding Theo's fragile state, and rested his head on the man's knee with a deep sigh of contentment. There's my boy, Theo murmured, tears glistening in his eyes as he stroked the still matted fur. Quite an adventure you've had. Watching their interaction, Mina felt simultaneously essential and intrusive, a witness to a private moment of connection that highlighted her own isolation. She busied herself in the kitchen, unpacking groceries and organizing medications, while the murmur of Theo's one-sided conversation with Scout created a pleasant backdrop. Later, as afternoon light slanted through dusty windows, Mina served a simple meal at the small table beside Theo's chair. The domestic act felt foreign, yet familiar, stirring memories of caring for Harold during his decline. But this was different. Theo would recover, would regain his independence. Her assistance was temporary, a neighborly courtesy, rather than a life sentence of caregiving. I'll return tomorrow morning, she announced as she prepared to leave, having settled Theo, with everything he might need within reach. Scout can stay with you tonight if you'd prefer. Theo considered the offer, glancing at his faithful companion. Actually, would you mind taking him one more night? These pain medications make me sleep like the dead. Better he has proper attention. The request sent a surprising flutter of pleasure through Mina. She had grown accustomed to Scout's quiet presence in her empty house. Of course, we'll manage fine. Standing in the doorway, Scout at her side, Mina felt Theo's gaze on her face. Why are you doing all this, Mina? Truly? The question deserved an honest answer, but Mina wasn't certain she understood her own motivations fully. After a moment's reflection, she said simply, Perhaps I needed the interruption as much as you needed the help. His answering smile, warm and genuine beneath his silver beard, stayed with her during the drive home. a pleasant counterpoint to the solitary evenings that had defined her life for so long. So, following weeks brought unexpected rhythms to Mina's carefully structured life. Mornings began with Scout's gentle nudge against her hand, followed by a walk through her garden, where autumn painted the landscape in amber and crimson. After breakfast, they would drive to Theo's cottage, where each day brought small but significant improvements in his mobility and spirits. "You're getting quite good with that walker," Mina observed one crisp October morning as Theo carefully navigated from bedroom to kitchen. Scout trotted alongside him, attentive to every movement as if appointed as a canine physical therapist. "Don't sound so surprised," Theo chuckled, lowering himself into a kitchen chair. "I may be old, but I'm stubborn." "Stubborn enough to climb a roof and land yourself in this predicament," she reminded him, setting a mug of coffee before him. The easy banter between them had developed gradually, surprising them both with its naturalness. As Theo's physical needs decreased, Mina found herself lingering longer at the cottage each day. What began as necessary assistance evolved into companionable hours spent in Theo's sunroom, where conversation flowed more freely than either had experienced in years. Scout typically settled between them, his presence a bridge connecting two people, slowly relearning the art of human connection. "I noticed you've been working on something," Mina commented one afternoon, nodding toward the half-completed wooden birdhouse visible through the workshop doorway. Wood chips still dusted the floor where Theo had attempted some cautious whittling the previous day. "Just keeping my hands busy," he said with a dismissive wave. "Charlotte always said idle hands were the devil's playground, though in my case they're just stiff and arthritic." Mina studied the intricate details already carved into the cedar, delicate leaves and vines that would eventually surround the entrance hole. "It's beautiful craftsmanship. You have quite a talent." A flush of pleasure colored Theo's weathered cheeks. "Would you like to see some other pieces? Before my accident, I was working on a commission for the library, new reading benches for the children's section." What followed was a tour of Theo's workshop, a space Mina had previously only glimpsed while fetching supplies. Beneath dusty tarps lay evidence of extraordinary skill: rocking chairs with perfectly balanced proportions, bookends carved to resemble Silver Creek's historic courthouse, jewelry, boxes with inlaid wood creating patterns as intricate as any of Mina's embroidery. "This is how I've spent my retirement," Theo explained, running his fingers lovingly over a cherry wood music box. "After 40 years sorting other people's mail, it's nice to create something that brings joy instead of just bills and catalogs." "The post office must seem a distant memory now," Mina reflected, carefully examining a chess set with pieces shaped like local wildlife. "Not as distant as you might think. I still remember every address on my route, every family's habits. The Martins always had packages from their son in California. The Robertsons received letters from their daughter at college every Tuesday." He paused, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And a certain Mrs. Thornbridge ordered gardening catalogues like clockwork each February." Mina looked up in surprise. "You remember that?" "I remember more than you'd expect," Theo replied softly. "Including how you'd always leave homemade cookies for the mail carriers during the holidays, ginger snaps if I recall correctly." "Harold's favorite," Mina acknowledged, the memory both sweet and painful. "I haven't baked them since he passed." A comfortable silence fell between them, punctuated only by Scout's contented sighs as he dozed in a patch of sunlight. In that moment, Mina realized how seldom she spoke Harold's name aloud anymore, as if verbal acknowledgement might reopen wounds carefully tended into scars. "It gets easier," Theo said, seeming to read her thoughts. "Not better exactly, just different. Charlotte loved autumn. First few years after she was gone, I could hardly bear to watch the leaves change. Now I can appreciate the beauty again, even if it's tinged with remembering." Mina nodded, unexpectedly moved by his candor. "Harold loved Christmas. I've kept the decorations boxed away. Couldn't face the empty house with all that cheer." "Perhaps this year might be different," Theo suggested, carefully, returning the music box to its shelf. Before Mina could respond, a sharp knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Scout immediately stood at attention, head cocked toward the unexpected sound. "Are you expecting someone?" Mina asked, noting Theo's puzzled expression. "Not a soul," he replied, reaching for his walker. Mina waved him back. "I'll see who it is." The visitor stood impatiently on the porch, a tall man in his 40s with Theo's jawline, but none of his warmth. His expensive overcoat and polished shoes seemed out of place against the cottage's rustic backdrop. "Can I help you?" Mina inquired, instinctively positioning herself in the doorway. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm looking for Theodore Gallagher. This is his residence, correct?" "Yes, but he's recovering from an injury. May I ask who's calling?" "David Gallagher." He straightened, as if the name should carry significance. "His nephew. And you are?" "Wilhelmina Thornbridge." "Neighbor." The simplification felt necessary, though Mina wasn't entirely sure why. "A neighbor," David repeated, his tone suggesting he found this suspicious. "Well, I need to speak with my uncle. Family business." Before Mina could respond, Theo called from inside. "Let him in, Mina. That's Charlotte's nephew, though I haven't seen him in... What would it be now, David?" 8 years. David brushed past Mina with barely a nod, his attention focused on his uncle. 7 years, Uncle Theo. Since Aunt Charlotte's funeral. Scout greeted the newcomer with uncharacteristic restraint, positioning himself protectively near Theo's chair. The atmosphere in the cottage, previously warm with companionship, now crackled with tension. "What brings you all the way from Chicago?" Theo asked, gesturing toward an empty chair that David ignored. "Concern for your welfare," his nephew replied, pacing the small living room like a prosecutor building a case. "A colleague mentioned running into someone from Silver Creek who said you'd been hospitalized. Given your age and living situation, I thought I should check in." The words sounded appropriate, but the tone rang false. Mina, accustomed to reading subtle classroom dynamics during her teaching years, sensed an agenda beneath the expressed concern. "As you can see, I'm on the mend," Theo replied evenly. "Mina has been kind enough to help with daily needs." David's assessing gaze swept over Mina, then the cottage's interior. "This place isn't exactly accessible, Uncle. Have you considered it might be time for something more appropriate for someone in your condition? Assisted living has come a long way." "My condition is temporary," Theo countered, a hint of steel entering his voice. "The doctor expects a full recovery within months." "Even so," David pressed, "this isolated location, all these stairs and hazards, it's not suitable for someone your age. There are excellent facilities in Chicago where you'd have proper care." Mina felt her spine stiffen at the patronizing tone. Though she had thought similar things about the cottage's accessibility, hearing them from this stranger felt intrusive. "I'm perfectly comfortable here," Theo stated firmly, "and not nearly ready for the nursing home if that's what you're suggesting." David sighed with exaggerated patience. "I'm talking about quality of life, Uncle, and frankly about responsible planning. This property has become quite valuable. The location alone would fetch a considerable sum if you decided to sell." And there it was, the real purpose of this unexpected visit. Mina exchanged a quick glance with Theo, whose expression confirmed her suspicion. This wasn't about Theo's welfare at all. "I appreciate your concern," Theo said carefully, "but I have no intention of selling. This was Charlotte's home, our home. Sentiment is a luxury, Uncle Theo." David's tone hardened. "As your only living relative, I feel obligated to help you make sensible decisions. I've taken the liberty of researching some options." He removed a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the coffee table. "Information about Lakeview Senior living in Chicago. Very exclusive, excellent care. The sale of this property would more than cover expenses for the rest of your life." Mina watched Theo's face cloud with anger and something else. Apprehension. 7 years of no contact, then this sudden appearance with convenient solutions already prepared. The implications were troubling. "I think," Mina interjected, unable to remain silent, "Mr. Gallagher has made his position clear. Perhaps this discussion could continue when he's feeling stronger." David turned to her with cold assessment. "With all due respect, Mrs. Thornbridge, this is a family matter. While we appreciate neighbors helping out," he emphasized the word in a way that suggested suspicion, "important decisions should involve actual family." "Mina stays," Theo said firmly. "She's earned the right to speak her mind here." The declaration warmed something in Mina's chest, even as David's expression darkened further. "Very well," he conceded, checking his expensive watch. "I'll be in town for a few days, staying at the Silver Creek Inn. I suggest you review these materials, Uncle. We can discuss next steps when you've had time to consider the sensible path forward." After David's departure, silence settled heavily in the cottage. Scout, sensing the lingering tension, pressed his body against Theo's legs, in silent comfort. "I apologize for my nephew's behavior," Theo finally said, his voice weary. Charlotte always said he had his father's ambition without his father's heart. Mina studied Theo's troubled expression. He seemed rather prepared with his suggestions. Too prepared, Theo agreed grimly. This isn't the first time he suggested selling. The land along the creek has become valuable since they built that new shopping development on the other side. He sighed deeply. "I just never expected him to use my accident as leverage." "Do you think he'll persist?" Mina asked, concern growing as she considered Theo's vulnerable position. Theo reached down to stroke Scout's head, finding comfort in the familiar texture of fur beneath his fingers. "David always was persistent when money was involved, and technically he is my only remaining family." The statement hung in the air, highlighting the precarious nature of their situation. Theo had no legal protection against a determined relative, and Mina, despite her growing involvement in his daily life, was still just a neighbor in the eyes of the law. "Well," she said with more confidence than she felt, "he'll find me persistent as well if he thinks he can bully you into selling your home." Theo's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "You've already done more than I had any right to expect, Mina. I won't drag you into family disputes." "I believe," Mina replied, gathering Scout's leash for their evening walk, "that I've dragged myself in quite effectively already." As she guided Scout around the garden that evening, Mina found herself unusually distracted. The encounter with David Gallagher had stirred protective instincts she hadn't realized she still possessed. Theo's cottage had become more than just a neighbor's home in recent weeks. It had become a place where Mina felt inexplicably at ease, more so than in her own carefully maintained, yet emotionally sterile house. Friday dawned with unseasonable warmth for late October. Mina woke early, her mind still occupied with the previous day's confrontation. Scout, now accustomed to their routine, waited patiently by the bedroom door, his leash already in his mouth. "Always one step ahead, aren't you?" she murmured, reaching for her robe. Their morning walk extended beyond the garden's boundaries today, venturing along the stone wall that separated her property from Theo's. The wall had always represented a clear boundary between their lives, yet now seemed more like a connection than a division. Mina found herself wondering about the countless mornings they had each gone about their solitary routines, separated by just a few hundred yards, yet completely isolated in their private worlds. Back home, Mina was surprised to find her telephone ringing, a rare occurrence since most of her limited communications happened via the community bulletin board at the grocery store or brief exchanges after Sunday services. "Mrs. Thornbridge, this is Elaine Winters from the Silver Creek Gazette." Mina recognized the name vaguely, a local reporter who covered community events and human interest stories. "Yes? I'm calling about the upcoming Harvest Festival. The committee mentioned you might be attending this year. First time in quite a while, they said. We're doing a feature on long-time residents reconnecting with community traditions. Would you be willing to comment?" The assumption caught Mina off guard. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I haven't made plans to attend." "Oh," Elaine sounded genuinely surprised. "I was told you'd be accompanying Theodore Gallagher, who's entering his woodwork in the crafts exhibition. Perhaps my information was incorrect." Mina's mind flashed to recent conversations with Theo, trying to recall any mention of the festival. "This is the first I'm hearing of it." "I see." The disappointment in the reporter's voice was evident. "Well, if your plans change, we'd love to include you both in our coverage. It would make a wonderful story. Two of Silver Creek's most private residents participating together." After hanging up, Mina stood in her kitchen, unsettled by the conversation. The Harvest Festival had once been a highlight of her and Harold's autumn calendar. They had attended faithfully for decades, Harold judging the pie contest while Mina displayed her prize roses. After his death, she had withdrawn from such community events, finding the sympathetic glances and well-meaning inquiries about her welfare unbearable. The thought of returning now, especially alongside Theo, stirred complicated emotions. When had their names become linked in community gossip? And why hadn't Theo mentioned his plans for the festival? These questions accompanied her on the drive to his cottage, where she found him in the workshop, carefully sanding a small wooden box despite his limited mobility. "You're entering the Harvest Festival," Mina stated without preamble, Scout trotting ahead to greet his master. Theo looked up, surprise evident on his face. How did you— Elaine Winters called. Apparently we're attending together. A flush crept up from beneath Theo's beard. Ah, small-town gossip moves faster than I remembered. He set aside his sandpaper with a sigh. I was planning to mention it. The festival committee contacted me about displaying some pieces. Not for competition, just exhibition. Thought it might drum up some commission work for the holidays. And my assumed attendance? Mina prompted, hanging her sweater on the workshop peg that had somehow become hers in recent weeks. That was presumptuous of me, Theo admitted. I'd hoped to ask if you might consider going. Not necessarily with me, but the same day, perhaps. His awkwardness was endearing despite Mina's irritation. They're having a special rose display this year. Thought you might enjoy seeing it. The gesture, his awareness of her interests, softened Mina's indignation. You should have asked, rather, than letting me hear it from the local paper. You're right, Theo nodded, returning to his sanding with deliberate focus. To be honest, I wasn't sure how to broach the subject. Festivals, community gatherings, they're different after losing someone. Harder. The simple acknowledgement of this shared understanding hung between them. Mina moved to the workbench, examining the box he was creating, a delicate thing with inlaid wood forming an intricately detailed rose on the lid. Is this your exhibition piece? She asked, fingertips hovering above the detailed petals. One of them. His voice held a note of hesitation. It's not finished yet. Something in his tone made Mina look closer at the design. The rose was unmistakably a Madame Alfred Carrière, the exact heritage variety that formed the centerpiece of her garden. The realization that Theo had been paying such careful attention to her prized blooms brought unexpected warmth to her cheeks. The festival is next Saturday, Mina said finally. If you still wish to attend, I could drive. Your mobility has improved, but the fairgrounds would be challenging with a walker. The offer hung in the air, not quite an acceptance of his invitation, but not a rejection either. Theo's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes in a way that Mina had come to find quietly appealing. I'd appreciate that, he said simply. Their conversation was interrupted by the telephone's shrill ring. Theo reached for his walking cane, moving with increasing confidence despite his still healing hip. Theodore Gallagher speaking, he answered. Then his expression darkened. Yes, David, I received the materials. No, I haven't changed my mind. That's not necessary. Mina busied herself with Scout, offering the dog his morning treat, while trying not to eavesdrop on what was clearly becoming a heated exchange. Theo's voice grew increasingly firm as he repeatedly declined whatever his nephew was proposing. I understand your concern, he said finally, but my decision is made. This discussion is finished. He hung up with more force than necessary, the sound echoing in the small cottage. Problems? Mina inquired cautiously, noting the tension in Theo's shoulders. David's arranged for a real estate appraiser to visit next week, without consulting me. The controlled anger in his voice was evident. He seems to think, if I know exactly how much the property is worth, I'll be persuaded by sheer dollar figures. Mina frowned. That's remarkably presumptuous. It's how David operates, always has been. Theo lowered himself carefully into his chair, frustration evident in every movement. Charlotte used to say he'd sell the sunset if he could figure out how to package it. What will you do when the appraiser arrives? Send them away, I suppose. He sighed heavily. Though that won't end it. David can be remarkably persistent when it comes to financial opportunities. Mina hesitated, then offered, I could be here. When they come. Sometimes an additional presence can discourage overreaching. Theo studied her with a mixture of gratitude and concern. You've already involved yourself more than anyone could expect, Mina. This isn't your battle. Perhaps not, she acknowledged, but I've discovered I dislike seeing people pressured into decisions they don't wish to make. The realization surprised her. This protectiveness felt both foreign and familiar, like rediscovering a part of herself long dormant. Later that afternoon, as Mina prepared a simple lunch for them both, she noticed Scout's unusual behavior. The dog kept moving to the window, ears perked and body tense. What is it, boy? She asked, following his gaze. Through the kitchen window, she spotted David Gallagher standing near the property line, apparently deep in conversation with Frank Dawson from the neighboring farm. The men's body language suggested an intense discussion, with David gesturing expansively toward various parts of Theo's land. We have company, Mina announced quietly, nodding toward the window when Theo looked up questioningly. His expression hardened as he recognized the figures. Measuring up the inheritance already, I see. Should we be concerned about Mr. Dawson? He seemed supportive when I first met him. Theo considered this, absently stroking Scout's head. Frank's family has farmed that land for generations. They've always had an interest in acquiring this parcel if I ever decided to sell. Not. Surprising David would approach him. The implications of this alliance troubled Mina. If Theo's neighbor had his own motivations for supporting a sale, it further isolated Theo in his desire to remain in his home. She watched as David handed something to Frank, papers of some kind, before the men shook hands and parted ways. The wolves are circling, Theo murmured, more to himself than to Mina. Then it's fortunate you have a guard dog, she replied with forced lightness, scratching behind on Scout's ears. The dog responded with an appreciative thump of his tail against the floor. Theo's chuckle held little humor. And a remarkably formidable neighbor, it seems. The question that had been forming in Mina's mind throughout the morning finally found voice. Theo, if you don't mind my asking, why is this property so important to you? Beyond the sentimental attachments, I mean. The directness of her question seemed to surprise him, but after a thoughtful pause, he gestured toward the window overlooking the back garden. Come see something. With Scout trailing behind them, Theo led Mina through the cottage's sunroom and out the back door. The autumn sunshine illuminated the overgrown garden, where vegetables and flowers mingled in cheerful disarray. Beyond the immediate yard, a path wound toward a small rise crowned with ancient maple trees. It's a bit of a walk, Theo warned, testing his weight on his cane. But I think I can manage with your assistance. Together they made their way slowly along the path, Scout ranging ahead and circling back as if ensuring their safety. The exertion brought color to Theo's face, but determination kept him moving steadily forward. At the crest of the hill, Theo paused, allowing Mina to take in the panoramic view that suddenly opened before them. The cottage and its immediate surroundings formed just a small portion of his property. Beyond stretched meadows bordered by Silver Creek itself, its waters glinting in the afternoon sun. The town was visible in the distance, church spires and the courthouse dome rising above the tree line. Charlotte and I used to picnic here, Theo explained softly. She called it our private overlook, said you could see the whole world from this spot if you looked with the right eyes. The beauty of the vista was undeniable, but Mina sensed there was more to his attachment than aesthetics alone. It's lovely, she acknowledged, but surely there are other properties with beautiful views. Theo smiled, appreciating her practicality. Look there. He pointed toward a section of the meadow where wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing season. That's where we scattered our daughter's ashes. The simple statement struck Mina with unexpected force. In all their conversations about Charlotte, Theo had never mentioned a child. The revelation added layers to her understanding of his determination to protect this land. I didn't know, she said softly. Emily, Theo supplied, his voice rough with emotion. She was 7 when we lost her, leukemia. It was before treatments had advanced as they have now. He paused, gathering himself. Charlotte chose this spot because Emily loved watching for deer in the morning mist, said it was like looking for magic. Scout pressed against Theo's leg, offering silent support as the old man continued. This land isn't just property to me, Mina. It's where my family remains. I couldn't sell it any more than I could sell my own heart. Standing beside him on that sun-dappled hillside, Mina felt the true weight of what David's pressure campaigns threatened. Not just a home or an investment, but sacred ground, a sanctuary of memory that money could never replace. Thank you, she said simply, for showing me. Theo nodded, words unnecessary between them. As they made their careful way back down the path, Mina's resolve strengthened. Whatever happened next, she would not allow Theo to face these challenges alone. Some connections, she was beginning to understand, transcended conventional boundaries of neighbor or friend. Some bonds formed unexpectedly, yet felt as natural and necessary as breathing. Silver Creek's annual Harvest Festival transformed the town square into a tapestry of autumn splendor. Hay bales and cornstalks framed vendor booths, while strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, ready to illuminate the evening celebrations. The scent of caramel apples and cinnamon donuts permeated the crisp morning air as Mina guided her Buick into the designated parking area. It's more elaborate than I remember, she observed, hands tightening nervously on the steering wheel. 5 years of self-imposed isolation had made the prospect of community engagement daunting. Beside her, Theo adjusted his scarf against the autumn chill. The tourism board's been promoting it regionally. Brings in good business for local shops. His own apprehension was evident in the way he repeatedly checked his reflection in the passenger mirror, smoothing his now neatly trimmed beard. Scout watched expectantly from the back seat, head tilted as if questioning whether he was included in the day's adventures. "I'm afraid pets aren't permitted at the festival grounds," Mina explained to the dog, whose intelligent eyes seemed to register disappointment. "We'll bring you something special, though." The walk from the parking area proved challenging but manageable. Theo had graduated from Walker to cane in the weeks since his nephew's unwelcome visit, and though his gait remained cautious, his determination was unwavering. Mina maintained a slower pace beside him, hyper-aware of curious glances from townspeople who clearly found their joint appearance noteworthy. "Mina Thornbridge!" The enthusiastic greeting came from Eleanor Whitaker, president of the garden club Mina had once actively participated in. "We've missed you at meetings, dear, and Theodore Gallagher, too. What a delightful surprise." Before either could respond, Eleanor had embraced Mina and begun steering them toward the exhibition tent. "Theo, your woodwork display is causing quite a stir. And Mina, you simply must see the Heritage Rose competition. Not the same without your entries, of course, but Louise Henderson has been trying to cultivate that Madame Alfred Carrière variety you were always so successful with." The casual mention of her signature rose variety caused Mina to glance at Theo, whose slight smile acknowledged their shared secret, the wooden box with its carved replica of that very bloom, now displayed among his craftsmanship. Inside the massive exhibition tent, Theo's woodworking commanded a prominent corner. A crowd had gathered around his display, admiring the craftsmanship that transformed humble materials into art. The rose-adorned box sat centrally positioned, its delicate inlay work capturing light in a way that made the wooden petals appear almost translucent. "It's remarkable," murmured a voice behind them. Mina turned to find Elaine Winters, the Gazette reporter, notebook in hand. "Mr. Gallagher, would you share the inspiration behind this particular piece? It's exquisite." Theo cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just something I've observed over the years. My neighbor, Mrs. Thornbridge, grows extraordinary roses." Elaine's eyes brightened with journalistic interest. "So this piece represents a connection between neighbors? What a wonderful human interest angle." "It's simply a box," Mina interjected, sensing Theo's discomfort, "though exceptionally crafted." "Too modest, both of you," Elaine persisted. "The whole town's been talking about your friendship, how Mrs. Thornbridge has been helping after your accident, Mr. Gallagher. In an age where neighbors barely know each other's names, it's refreshing." The conversation might have continued awkwardly had Frank Dawson not approached, his weathered face serious, despite the festive surroundings. "Theo, Mina," he greeted them with a nod. "Might I have a word in private?" Away from the crowd, in the relative quiet behind the exhibition tent, Frank's discomfort was palpable. He removed his cap, twisting it in his hands before speaking. "Thought you should know. Your nephew's been making rounds with some developer from the city, been approaching several property owners along the creek, myself included." Theo's expression darkened. "What sort of developer?" "Resort company. Looking to build some high-end retreat center. Needs substantial water frontage, which is why they're eyeing our properties." Frank replaced his cap, squaring his shoulders. "Figured you'd want to know, especially after our conversation last week." Mina glanced between them, realizing there had been discussions she wasn't privy to. "What conversation?" Theo sighed heavily. "Frank came by to warn me that David had approached him about potentially purchasing his land, contingent on my property also being available. Apparently, they need both parcels for the development to work. And I told him then what I'm telling you now," Frank added firmly. "The Dawson farm isn't for sale, no matter what fancy figures they're throwing around. Land's been in my family since Silver Creek was founded. Some things matter more than money." Relief softened Theo's features. "I appreciate your loyalty, Frank." "Just good neighbors," Frank replied with a shrug. "Like you two." He nodded toward the festival. "Better get back. Wife's manning." "Our produce stand. Just wanted you prepared in case your nephew makes an appearance today." As Frank departed, Mina turned to Theo. "You didn't mention this." "Didn't want to worry you," he admitted. You've already taken on more than your fair share of my troubles." Before Mina could respond, a familiar and unwelcome voice cut through the festival ambience. "Uncle Theo, what a coincidence." David Gallagher approached, impeccably dressed, despite the casual setting. Beside him stood a man in a business suit that marked him as an outsider to the community gathering. "Hardly a coincidence when you're staying in town," Theo replied evenly. David's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Allow me to introduce Robert Jensen from Lakeside Development Group. He's very interested in the potential of your property." "My property isn't for sale," Theo stated firmly. "As I've told you repeatedly." The developer stepped forward with practiced charm. "Mr. Gallagher, we haven't had the opportunity to discuss the scale of what we're proposing. Our eco-resort would actually preserve much of the natural beauty of your land, while providing significant—" "Mr. Jensen," Mina interrupted, drawing herself up with the authority that had once silenced rowdy classrooms. "Mr. Gallagher has made his position clear. This is hardly the appropriate venue for such discussions." David's attention shifted to Mina, his expression calculating. "Mrs. Thornbridge, isn't it? You've become quite involved in my uncle's affairs. One might wonder about your particular interest in his property decisions." The insinuation hung in the air, its ugliness at odds with the festive surroundings. Several festival-goers nearby had slowed their pace, attention caught by the confrontation. "That's enough, David." Theo's voice held a steel that belied his physical fragility. "Mrs. Thornbridge has shown me nothing but kindness, which is more than I can say for family who appear only when they smell profit." The developer, sensing the deteriorating situation, attempted conciliation. "Perhaps we could schedule a more appropriate time to present our proposal properly. We're prepared to offer well above market value." "Some things aren't for sale at any price," Theo replied, using his cane to gesture toward the festival grounds. "This community, these connections, you can't put a dollar figure on what matters most." David's facade of civility cracked. "This is sentimentality you can't afford, Uncle. You're barely managing in that cottage. One bad winter, another fall, then what? At least consider the security this offer would provide." An unexpected voice joined the conversation. "Theodore Gallagher hasn't been barely managing for weeks now." Eleanor Whitaker stepped forward, Garden Club authority in full display. "Our community has been quite aware of his recovery progress, thanks to Mina's dedicated assistance and updates at our meetings." Mina blinked in surprise. She had provided no such updates, having avoided community gatherings entirely until today. Eleanor continued undeterred. "Additionally, the Town Council's Home Assistance Program has already approved modifications to make Theo's cottage fully accessible. Ramps, bathroom renovations, all being handled by our local contractors at minimal cost." This was news to both Theo and Mina, but neither contradicted Eleanor's confident assertions. "Furthermore," added Elaine Winters, who had apparently been listening nearby, "Mr. Gallagher's woodworking business has seen renewed interest since word spread of his remarkable recovery. The Gazette will be featuring his craftsmanship in our upcoming special edition." Others joined the impromptu defensive circle. Frank Dawson, the librarian who had commissioned Theo's reading benches, even the pastor from the church Mina attended sporadically. Each offered some contribution to the narrative of community support that Eleanor had spontaneously created. Faced with this united front, David's position visibly weakened. The developer, sensing a losing proposition, made polite excuses and retreated toward the festival entrance. David lingered, frustration evident in his rigid posture. "This isn't over," he muttered to Theo. "You're being foolish, and these people won't be around when reality sets in." "That's where you're wrong," Mina said quietly. "That's precisely what community means, being present for reality, whatever form it takes." After David's departure, Mina turned to Eleanor in bewilderment. "The town council approved home modifications? There's a home assistance program?" Eleanor's eyes twinkled mischievously. "There will be by Monday's council meeting, which Agnes Pemberton has already agreed to propose as chairwoman. Sometimes you have to manifest what should exist before it actually does." "But why?" Theo asked, clearly moved by the unexpected intervention. "Because Silver Creek takes care of its own," Eleanor replied simply, "and because some things are worth preserving. Not just land, but the kind of neighbors who become something more." The remainder of the festival day passed in a blur of unexpected connections. Mina found herself reintroduced to community she had withdrawn from, while Theo received more woodworking commissions than he could fulfill alone. By early evening, when paper lanterns illuminated the square and a local band set up for dancing, both were exhausted but strangely energized. "We should collect Scout," Mina suggested, noting Theo's increasing fatigue despite his attempts to hide it. "He's been alone most of the day." The drive home was companionably silent, Scout dozing in the back seat after enthusiastically greeting them both. When they reached Theo's cottage, Mina hesitated before turning off the engine. "Would you like to come in?" Theo asked, a newfound confidence in his invitation. "I have something to show you." Inside, Scout immediately settled into his favorite spot by the fireplace, while Theo disappeared briefly into his workshop. He returned carrying the rose-adorned box that had drawn so much attention at the festival. "This was intended for you," he explained, carefully placing it in her hands. From the beginning. Mina opened the hinged lid, revealing a velvet-lined interior perfectly sized to hold the silver locket that had brought them together, the locket that now rested on her dresser at home. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the carved petals with gentle fingers. "Like the woman who grows the roses," Theo said softly, the simple compliment carrying more meaning than flowery declarations ever could. As darkness gathered around the cottage, they spoke of practical matters, Eleanor's impromptu home modification program, which apparently was gaining genuine support from town council members who had approached them later in the day, David's likely next moves, and the upcoming winter, which suddenly seemed less daunting with plans for community support in place. What remained unspoken yet palpably present was the shifting nature of their connection, no longer defined by neighbor helping neighbor, but by something deeper that neither was quite ready to name. As Mina prepared to leave, Theo walked her to the door despite his fatigue. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything today." "I didn't do anything," Mina protested. "Eleanor and the others created that support network from thin air." "You showed up," Theo countered. "After 5 years of choosing solitude, you chose connection. That's no small thing, Mina." The truth of his observation resonated within her. Driving home to her empty Victorian, Mina realized that for the first time since Harold's death, she was returning to a house that felt like a temporary stopping place rather than a final destination. Something had shifted fundamentally in how she viewed her life, not as a closing chapter to be carefully preserved, but as a story still unfolding in unexpected ways. Winter descended upon Silver Creek with gentle persistence. November's crimson and gold gave way to December's crystalline beauty as frost-limbed tree branches and morning fog transformed ordinary landscapes into ethereal visions. True to Eleanor's improvised proclamation, the town council had indeed established a home assistance program, with Theo's cottage selected as the inaugural project. Over Thanksgiving weekend, volunteers had installed a wheelchair-accessible ramp to the front porch, modified the bathroom with safety features, and completed numerous small repairs that had been beyond Theo's capabilities even before his accident. Scout supervised the proceedings with dignified attention, accepting treats from workers while maintaining his self-appointed role as guardian. Mina found herself at the center of a community she had deliberately avoided for years. The isolation that had once felt protective now seemed unnecessarily limiting as she reconnected with former colleagues, garden, club members and neighbors who welcomed her return to active participation without dwelling on her extended absence. "The Christmas Bazaar Committee is desperate for someone to coordinate the craft section," Eleanor mentioned casually during one of her frequent visits to check on the cottage renovations. "Your organizational skills would be perfect, Mina." "I haven't celebrated Christmas since Harold passed," Mina replied reflexively, then paused, reconsidering. "But perhaps it's time to change." The words felt both frightening and freeing. Later that evening, as she and Theo shared a quiet dinner at his newly renovated kitchen table, she mentioned the committee invitation. "I think you'd enjoy it," he encouraged, passing a basket of fresh rolls that had become his specialty as his mobility improved. His woodworking tools remained his first love, but baking had emerged as an unexpected pleasure during his recovery. "Though you'll likely be roped into a dozen more committees once, till they realize you're available." "A danger I'm willing to risk," Mina replied with a smile that came more naturally these days. Actually, I've been thinking about something else as well. The boxes in my attic. Theo waited patiently, understanding the significance of those simple words. The Christmas decorations she had packed away along with her willingness to experience seasonal joy. I'm not sure I can face them alone, she admitted quietly. You don't have to, he said simply. 2 days. Later they stood together in Mina's dusty attic, surrounded by carefully labeled containers of holiday memories. Scout explored the unfamiliar space with curious sniffs, while Mina hesitantly opened the first box. Harold's Santa hat lay on top, the red velvet faded but still vibrant against the tissue paper. Mina lifted it gently, expecting the usual wave of grief to overtake her. Instead, she found herself smiling at the memory of Harold wearing it while reading "'Twas the Night Before." Christmas to the neighborhood children each year. He had a beautiful reading voice, she told Theo, who listened attentively as she shared stories attached to each treasured ornament and decoration. The sharing became a kind of ceremony, acknowledging the past while creating space for new possibilities. By early afternoon, they had transformed Mina's parlor into a testament to holidays past and present. The traditional tree stood in the bay window, adorned with ornaments spanning decades. Yet, among the familiar decorations were new additions: a hand-carved wooden star that Theo had created for the top, and a special ornament bearing Scout's paw print that the veterinarian had made during his recent checkup. It looks like Christmas again, Mina observed softly, standing in the doorway to admire their work. It looks like home, Theo corrected gently. The word hung between them, layered with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. Their relationship had evolved into a comfortable routine, shared meals, festival outings, quiet evenings with Scout stretched between them as they read or talked. Theo's cottage had been transformed by community efforts, while Mina's Victorian had gradually softened from museum-like perfection to lived-in warmth. David had made one final attempt to pressure his uncle, sending formal paperwork from his Chicago law firm suggesting Theo lacked capacity to manage his affairs. The town had responded with characteristic solidarity. Theo's doctor provided clear medical documentation of his sound mind, while the local attorney drafted powers of attorney naming trusted community members to assist if ever needed. The silver locket, now housed in the rose-carved box, remained a tangible reminder of how unexpectedly their lives had intertwined. December progressed with increasing festivity. The Christmas bazaar proved successful beyond expectations, with Theo's woodcrafts selling out within hours. Mina's organizational talents were immediately recognized, resulting in multiple committee invitations just as he had predicted. She accepted selectively, preserving time for what mattered most, the quiet moments of connection that had become the foundation of her renewed engagement with life. 1 week before Christmas, Silver Creek awakened to the season's first significant snowfall. 8 inches of powder transformed the landscape overnight, causing school cancellations and impromptu sledding expeditions. Mina watched the celebration from her kitchen window while preparing her morning coffee, surprised to find herself eager to experience the winter wonderland firsthand rather than observing from safe isolation. Her telephone rang just as she was pulling on boots for a tentative expedition into the snow-covered garden. "Have you looked out your back window yet?" Theo's voice held barely contained excitement. "I was just heading out," Mina replied, already moving toward the rear of the house. "What am I looking for?" "Just look along the stone wall." From her back porch, Mina gasped at the sight. The ancient stone wall separating their properties, the boundary that had symbolized their mutual isolation for 15 years, had been transformed overnight. Atop the snow-covered stones stood a series of exquisite snow sculptures, a family of snow rabbits, detailed down to whiskers and alert ears, miniature snow castles with delicate turrets and archways, and at the center, a snow bench just large enough for 2 people, positioned to perfectly frame the view of her rose garden, now dormant under winter's blanket but promised to bloom again. "Did you do this?" she asked, though the craftsmanship unmistakably bore Theo's artistic signature. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "The snow was perfect for sculpting and I wanted to suggest something." "I'm listening," Mina encouraged, watching as Scout bounded through drifts in her garden, leaving chaotic trails through the pristine white. "The wall," Theo began carefully, "has stood between us for 15 years. I was thinking perhaps it's time for a gate instead. The metaphorical significance wasn't lost on Mina. A gate goes two ways, she observed. That's the idea, he replied, a smile evident in his voice despite the telephone line's limitations. What do you think? I think, Mina said thoughtfully, that I'd like to discuss it in person. Are you free for lunch? I'll bring the soup I made yesterday. Meet you at the Snow. Bench in 20 minutes? The simplicity of the arrangement belied its profound implications. Mina hung up the telephone, heart beating with an expectation she hadn't experienced in years. From her closet, she retrieved the wooden box containing the silver locket, securing it around her neck before bundling up for the winter meeting. The Snow bench proved remarkably sturdy, a testament to Theo's skill even in this temporary medium. They sat together, sharing thermoses of homemade vegetable soup, while Scout investigated every snowdrift within sight. The winter sun emerged from morning clouds, casting diamond-like sparkles across the untouched snow beyond the garden. This is where Charlotte and I first saw the property, Theo said, gesturing toward the expansive view. Right about where this bench sits. She said she could imagine raising children here, watching them play in these fields. We made an offer that same day. Mina listened, understanding that he was sharing more than a memory. He was connecting their present moment to his cherished past, building bridges between separate lives. Harold proposed to me on a winter day much like this one, she offered in return. Said the diamond reminded him of sunlight on snow, and he wanted to give me both. They sat in companionable silence, neither rushing to define what was developing between them. At 73 and 76, they had lived full lives, experienced profound losses, and established independent existences. Yet somehow, against all expectations, they had found their separate paths converging. About that gate, Mina said finally, I think it's an excellent idea, though perhaps we should consider something more substantial than snow for the construction. Theo's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes in the way she had come to cherish. I have some cedar that would weather well, could have it ready by spring, when your roses bloom again. Why wait for spring? Mina asked. Winter has its own kind of beauty. She touched the silver locket at her throat, feeling its familiar weight against her skin. Scout certainly doesn't mind traveling between our properties, regardless of season. True, Theo agreed, watching as the border collie created joyful chaos in a nearby snowdrift. He's never recognized the wall as a boundary. Wise creature. The conversation meandered comfortably, touching on practical matters. The Christmas Eve service they planned to attend together, Theo's growing woodworking commissions, Mina's renewed involvement with the garden club. Yet beneath these everyday topics ran a current of deeper understanding. Two people who had found in each other not replacement for what was lost, but companionship for what remained ahead. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow, they rose from the bench by mutual accord. Scout immediately appeared at their side, alert to the changing rhythm of the day. I have packages to wrap, Mina explained, though neither was in any hurry to part. And I have sawdust to create, Theo replied with a gentle humor that acknowledged his increased productivity. They walked together along the stone wall until they reached the point closest to both houses. Here, the wall dipped slightly, creating a natural location for the proposed gate. This seems like the right spot, Theo observed, marking the location with 2 sticks pressed into the snow. I'll start sketching designs tonight. Mina nodded, then made a decision that had been forming gradually over weeks of evolving connection. Christmas dinner, she said, at my house this year. Nothing elaborate, but I'd like to cook for you. The invitation represented more than a meal. It was an opening of the home she had kept as a private sanctuary, a willingness to create new memories within spaces defined by old ones. I'd be honored, Theo replied, understanding the significance. After a moment's hesitation, he added, perhaps we could make it a new tradition. Christmas at your Victorian, New Year's at my cottage. The suggestion of continuity, of shared holidays stretching into future seasons, warmed Mina despite the winter chill. I'd like that very much. As they prepared to part ways, Scout looked between them expectantly, clearly confused about which human to follow. Theo chuckled at the dog's dilemma. He's always been good at bringing people together, he observed. From that rainy day when he jumped through your car window with Charlotte's locket around his neck, almost as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Mina reached down to stroke the dog's soft ears. Perhaps he did, in his own way. Something about the afternoon's quality of light, the low winter sun casting long blue shadows across unmarked snow, created a moment of perfect clarity for Mina. Standing beside the wall that would soon become a gate, she recognized that life rarely offered neat conclusions or complete resolutions. Instead, it provided opportunities for new beginnings, often appearing in the most unexpected forms. A hungry dog jumping into a car, a silver locket connecting separate histories, a snow bench inviting shared moments. "I should head back before I lose the light," Theo said reluctantly. "Until tomorrow then," Mina replied. Their farewell had become a promise rather than an ending. As she watched Theo and Scout make their careful way through the snow toward the cottage, Mina felt the weight of the locket against her skin, not as a burden of the past, but as a connection to a present rich with unexpected joy. The hungry dog, with something surprising around his neck, had indeed changed the trajectory of an elderly woman's carefully ordered life, opening doors she had deliberately closed and windows she had systematically shuttered. Spring would eventually return to Silver Creek, bringing with it the revival of Mina's beloved roses and the completion of the cedar gate already taking shape in Theo's workshop. Summer would find them sharing evening walks along the creek that gave the town its name, while autumn would bring another harvest festival where their joint appearance would no longer raise curious eyebrows. But for now, winter offered its own gifts. The beauty of new snow unmarked except for Scout's enthusiastic paw prints, the promise of holidays reclaimed from grief's shadow, and the simple pleasure of soup shared on a snow bench positioned precisely where stone walls met and separate lives converged. Mina turned toward her Victorian home, noticing how welcoming it looked with Christmas lights outlining its gingerbread trim and a wreath on the door that Theo had crafted from pine boughs and woodland treasures. For the first time in 5 years, she was returning not to an empty house but to a home filled with possibility, a place where the past was honored but no longer confined her, where memories of Harold coexisted peacefully with hopes for tomorrow. And in this moment of perfect winter stillness, Wilhelmina Thornbridge discovered that hearts, like gardens, could lie dormant through seasons of grief, only to bloom again when least expected, often with greater beauty for having endured the frost. My friends, we have reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you take from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.